Great. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining this exciting webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whichever part of the world you all guys are in. And you made your presence in this amazing insurance webinar. Hope you all are having a great day. Today, we have an opportunity to engage in a thought-provoking discussion. I, on behalf of AI Core Spot, welcome all our esteemed guest speakers, the moderator, and all the pretty faces that makes up our lovely audience. So let me initiate with a humble introduction of myself and the company to you. My name is Nitin Naveen, and I'll be your host for the day. I'm working as Vice President Innovation Strategy at AI Core Spot, and I bring with me an experience of around a couple of decades in consulting firms dealing in and around the emerging technologies. My colleagues Arvind and Naveen will be assisting me in keeping today's event lively. Also, they will be stepping in to resolve technical glitches, if any. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to them for their hard work and dedication in making this event a great success. This webinar is intended to deliver the new age and technological advancements in the current industry, and obviously with a seamless experience. Speaking about the company AI Core Spot, let me provide a brief about you. We started a couple of years back, supported by knowledge and innovation partner, which is InfoVision, and technology partner, which is Digit7. AI Core Spot aims to function as a comprehensive knowledge hub, offering valuable information and perspectives on a wide range of cutting-edge technologies around Industry 4.0, including AI, ML, AR, VR, and so on. With the objective of offering in-depth exploration of all the sectors that involves technology, we introduce a different theme every month, and we have been progressively gaining momentum. Our goal is to become the leading AI-driven community worldwide, where individuals with similar interests like you can contribute to mutual growth and success. We prioritize industry-backed webinars, hybrid events to ensure that our knowledge base is built on credible data provided by esteemed industry leaders, subject matter experts, and our trusted partners. Further, we nurture the content through a lot of mediums like digital blogs, videos, podcasts, newsletters to shed light on the ever-evolving industry. I know you have joined us today for a one-of-a-kind webinar focused on managing cybersecurity risks, that is, key considerations for healthcare. We'll cover a range of topics, including cybersecurity threats, ransomware attacks, insider threats, health-related cybersecurity issues, and so on. Our expert panel will provide valuable insights and engage in thought-provoking discussion that you might not want to miss. And to let you know, there are lots more in the store in next month with focus on different technologies like generative AI, ML, blockchain, IoT, AR, VR, digital twins, metaverse, ChatGPT, and quantum computing. May I take this opportunity to further request all of you to go through our website, which is aicorespot.io, for future updates. We will be delighted if you could show your love for us via likes and shares on our social media handles. It will keep you all updated on everything what we propose to offer. Now, before we get into this particular panel discussion, there are a few highlights so that it can set up the tone for the great learning and networking day. We would like to introduce our community partners for today. It includes some great companies: Cleveland Clinic, InfoVision, Vituity, and Inflect Health, Roland Borg Corporation, Ascension Technologies, who came together to make this webinar a success. We also want to give thanks to all our attendees who took the time to register and join us today. We know you have a lot of things at your plate, so it means to us that you are here to achieve your objectives and connect with one another. Ultimately, our goal as a platform is to help you gain valuable insights and build meaningful relationships. So if you walk away with even just a few innovative ideas or connections, we'll consider it a job well done. So quickly, let me introduce the esteemed panel members. We have Mark, who is the VP Global Healthcare and Life Sciences Innovation and Strategy at InfoVision. May we have a small introduction from Mark?
Thank you, Nitin. Pleasure to be here today. I'm Mark Johnston, and today I'll be your moderator. I lead healthcare innovation and strategy for InfoVision, working to make healthcare more accessible, reduce costs, improve outcomes. I've been working closely with healthcare providers, payers, in their digital acceleration, and have about 17 years of healthcare experience across the healthcare ecosystem. And I think today's discussion is going to be one of the most critical ones we can have in healthcare today to make sure that we're all secure. So I'm proud to be here today, and we've got a great panel. Thanks, Nitin.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for moderating this panel discussion. Great to have you in this particular panel discussion. Next, we'll move to our first panel member, So I'll give this to Skip. So Skip, is Director Cybersecurity at Ascension Technologies. Over to you, Skip, for a great, for your brief introduction.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity. So I started my journey in healthcare with a bachelor's in nursing. I was a critical care and trauma nurse in the 90s. The .com craze rolled around, and being the geek and nerd that I was during high school, I got the bug and got an opportunity to go to work for Dell. And I spent about 15 years there. The last role that I had was working for Ascension, providing outsourced services and working with the cyber team there. Afforded me the opportunity about 5 years ago to take this position. One of the primary charters that I was given was to build a med device security program that didn't exist at the time. So that's been my primary focus, along with other disciplines. This next year, we'll move to operational technologies and expand our footprint in terms of cyber. And sure happy to be here. Looking forward to hearing from the others more than myself, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip. Thank you for a lovely introduction, and great to have you in the panel. Next, we'll move to Josh. So Josh is VP of Innovation at Vituity and Inflect Health. Over to you, Josh, to give a brief introduction about yourself.
Oh, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. So I'm an emergency physician, and at Inflect and Vituity, I'm the VP of Innovation. Vituity is a physician staffing organization that really tries to solve problems. We staff about 450 hospitals across most states in the country, which makes us, I think, the largest physician partnership in the country. Within there, we have an innovation hub, which is where I sit. We do corporate venture, we do internal prototyping, and we also do partnership, where we partner with everything from pre-seed and seed companies up through some of the big 4 tech companies to help with product development, deployment, and training.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for giving your lovely introduction, and love to have you as the 3rd panel member. So we'll have the 4th panel member. Let me give this honors to Sai. So just a brief information about Sai. Sai is Global Practice Head, Enterprise Cybersecurity and Risk Services at Infovision. Over to you, Sai.
Thank you, Nitin and team, for this opportunity. As Nitin mentioned, myself, Sai. I'm the global practice head for a dedicated cybersecurity practice by name EHRs. So we provide end-to-end cyber consulting, transformation, and managed services to our customers across the globe. As Kate said, I'm looking forward to learn a lot from all of my colleagues in this panel. Thank you.
Sure, Sai. Thanks a lot for your lovely introduction, and great to have you in the panel member as well. Next, we'll move to Karthik. So Karthik is Vice President, Healthcare Engineering at Roland Borg Corporation. So over to you, Karthik, to give you a brief introduction about yourself.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you for the opportunity as well. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon all. My name is Karthik. I'm the VP of Healthcare Engineering at Roland. I've spent about 30 years working in this field, so I'm going to spare you a lot of the details that you could find on LinkedIn. Instead, I'll just share that I'm passionate about seamless, safe, and by extension, secure interoperability. And during our discussion, I look forward to drawing upon my experiences in product development, systems engineering, quality assurance, and regulatory compliance that I spent a lot of years working on, specifically as they relate to cyber and in emerging technologies. So I'm happy to connect on these topics should we not get to these or you have more questions. But that's it. I'm super excited to be on the panel, hear from all the other panelists, and look forward to learning from you as well. Thank you again for the opportunity, Nathan.
Thank you, Karthik, for giving your lovely, valuable time, and love to be a part of this panel discussion. So we'll quickly move to Kate. So Kate is Senior Director of Cybersecurity Technology Protection at Cleveland Clinic, and he's the 5th panel member. So Kate, yes, over to you.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
Yes.
We're experiencing a little bit of an internet outage in this facility, so I am connected over my cell phone, but glad to be here. Sorry I couldn't see everyone. So yeah, I'm Keith Doomling, Senior Director of Technology Protection here at the Cleveland Clinic. Effectively, my teams are responsible for protecting the network infrastructure and the assets, and within our environment from internal and external cyber threats. Just to give you a kind of a size to understand the order of magnitude, we're protecting about 250,000 devices of some type at any given time. Prior to this, I was working at a regional hospital system in various cyber and IT roles. So I collectively have almost 20 years of experience within healthcare. Glad to be here to learn from the other panelists and share a couple things that I know and hopefully help others.
Thank you, Keith. And I'm sure we have a lovely panel discussion, and we'll have an amazing discussion going forward. I know everybody's waiting for this. So before we start, just one disclaimer, which I always do before any discussion. The views shared by all the speakers are their personal ones, not related to any organization or wish to hurt anyone. So over to you, Mark, to begin this exciting panel discussion.
Appreciate that, and thanks everybody for their introductions. That was very impressive. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, AI CoreSpot, for bringing us all together today. I'm honored to be joined today by a panel of leading industry recognized healthcare cyber experts. I know we're all looking forward to our discussion, learning more about industry expert perspectives, best practices on the ever-evolving healthcare cybersecurity space. And for context and background, as you may recall, cyber attacks in healthcare began really making national headlines if you look back to probably 2009 with the community health systems breach, which exposed, at the time, seemed like a large number, 450,000 patients. And then this was followed by, obviously, the other large-scale breaches, including the 2014, as we all know, Anthem breach, which exposed the personal information of about 78.8 million people, which I think really caught national headlines and woke up the nation to really pay attention to the sensitivity of personal healthcare information. These breaches raised awareness of the vulnerability of healthcare organizations to cyber attacks. And of course, in response, the US government passed the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health, as we know, HITECH, right, in 2009, which included provisions to improve the security of electronic health records at the time. HITECH also created, as we know, the Office for Civil Rights within the Department of Health and Human Services, which is responsible for enforcing HIPAA. And we've all been using HIPAA as an initial guideline in our cybersecurity practices, the federal law that protects, obviously privacy and security of patient health information that we're all familiar with. Now, of course, in recent years, the US government has taken several steps to improve cybersecurity in healthcare. In 2016, HHS issued the Blueprint for a Secure Health IT Future, which outlined a number of recommendations for improving the security of electronic health records. Then in 2018, HHS also created the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, that we all know, which is responsible for coordinating the federal government's efforts to protect critical infrastructure, including healthcare. And in March of this year, recent announcement, the Biden administration released the National Cybersecurity Strategy outlining 5 pillars to improve the nation's cyber posture. And despite these efforts, healthcare remains the most targeted industry by hackers of all industries in the United States and globally. This is due to the sensitive nature of the data, patient data, the interconnectedness of healthcare organizations. It's funny for me to use that term as we've been looking at interoperability and issues that have prevented that, but it is true. And the lack of security awareness among healthcare employees, which is a constant process to continue as we bring employees in and threats change. In 2022, there were over 600 healthcare breaches exposing the personal information of over 40 million people. This shows that cybersecurity in healthcare remains a serious challenge. Of course, the volume and sophistication of these attacks are ever increasing, and cyber is a patient safety challenge for healthcare. I think we need to keep that in mind. It comes down to the patient, and unlike banking, finance, insurance, manufacturing, human lives are at stake. We can't underline that that's the possibility with hacking into medical devices. Still is a possibility. Today, in the next 90 minutes, we're going to engage in insightful and open discussion to learn more about these challenges and how to address them. We'll also highlight how cybersecurity must be a fabric of every organization in healthcare. So with that, I think I'm going to start with Keith today. Keith, and we'll ask this of all the panel, because I think everyone has an opinion, everyone has best practices, and everybody, I'm sure, is excited to learn more what every organization here, be it a medical device, provider organization, clinical, how they're responding to these challenges. And it's the $6 million question, I'll take it, is what are the top 3 cybersecurity threats facing Cleveland Clinic today? And I'll open that up to the panel too. But Keith, I'd like you to take that on and give us kind of an overview of what you're looking at in that landscape as the top 3 threats that Cleveland Clinic is facing today.
Great question. Tough one too, because you asked me to limit it to 3. So I think that when we think about that question, or when I think about that question, and things that wake me up at night are, definitely third-party risk, as there's the interconnected world. Our security program is not necessarily the same as other security programs for our partners. And there's always concern of some type of threat actor or malicious activity entering from one of our partners, and potentially vice versa. The second point is, I would say, network and cyber hygiene, and that includes IoT security, your traditional how secure are all our assets. And the third one is business continuity, disaster recovery as it relates to ransomware. We always strive to understand what is the actual impact should an event like that occur at the clinic and how quickly we would recover and obviously contain it. Given that we are a very large system, anything that impacts one site is extremely detrimental, but we do not obviously want it to move, in any way from, to impact other sites just because we are a global healthcare organization. So I would say those are the three top areas that kind of keep me up at night, or at least wake me up at night.
And Skip, I'll turn the same question over. I want to hit the entire panel, but I'll move to the provider organization. Skip, what do you see as the top three? Hate to limit to that, but what do you see as the top three threats facing your organization?
I would say from my perspective, identity management and third party. So third party is a big bucket, right? So there's the concept of remote access, there's the concept of identity access management, federation, all those things that go into it in the third parties. And then furthermore, the fourth and fifth parties that I'm encountering with my third parties, right? Because they're subbing out to other entities. And so the rabbit hole just gets deeper and there's more layers. And so we're paying very close attention to that. I would say that application vulnerability patching in a healthcare environment is a foreign concept in the sense that, Keith mentioned hygiene. I would put it in that category. And while there's focus on the operating systems, for the most part, applications seem to be largely overlooked. And so we're working to shore that up quickly. And then number three would probably be, I would have said 3.5 years ago, med devices and OT, and now I'm going to say OT and med devices. I'm taking a very hard look at the operational technologies that live within our hospitals, which constitute small cities in a lot of cases, and they have the operational technology and controls that industrial environments have. And those in large part have been grossly overlooked because they're just there. The HVAC just runs, the water's purified, all those types of things. And so really scratching the head, peeling the onion back and going after what do we really need to do there? So that'd be my top three.
You've raised a couple of really great ones, and one on the OT devices, medical devices, I think we're going to cover in some detail. Prior to that, though, and I want to ask this question of you, and it may go back to Keith too, for this very similar. You brought up third-party risk and managing that. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you're managing that beyond typical BAAs that go to your third-party vendors. So if you want to address that, and then maybe Keith, you could give your opinion on that too, because I think it's an important thing to address here today.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think I would call it foundational, and the foundational aspect begins at the beginning of the journey with the vendor, and the clarity that you provide them to the requirements you expect, not only in your contract language, but in the provisions of, say, your security policy for the organization, and sharing that and saying you will equal or better this is our expectation. If not, then there are penalties. And so we have response and notification criteria based on the criticality of the event or incident, how soon it takes them to notify us, what the remediation plan is, the collaboration. All of that is spelled out in writing in great detail. And like I said, it starts at the beginning, but even before the beginning of that contractual, we do a fair amount of what we call tech assessments. In my mind, they're really more risk assessments. It's gaining an understanding of the architecture and the intent of the solution, how it's going to connect and interact in our environment and affect our ecosystem through that contact and understand the security controls or the lack thereof so that we can further inform the contracting process to put tighter language if necessary for the weaknesses that we identify in that approach.
Again, Keith, I'll go back to you just because this came up in this discussion on third-party risk. What about Cleveland Clinic? What's your position and how are you handling that and the layering piece that Skip brought up as well?
Yeah, I think Skip brought up a lot of great points and best practices. You know, we're following many of those as well. Over the years, we've definitely built out a much more robust architectural review process prior to engaging with any vendor and signing any type of contract, that both from an IT standpoint and a cyber standpoint. And we've been working with closely with legal and our supply chain to make sure that the proper language is included in the initial agreement. But I think an important point is those agreements also need to have the durability to continue managing the relationship, throughout the duration of time that, that solution is used. All too often, solutions are brought into organizations, they're assessed once, and then they are operationalized. And then aside from a laborious checklist or some type of questionnaire, there's often not a recertification process. So we're working to develop that type of recertification process where what we've operationalized is regularly reviewed more than just an assessment, regardless if it's something that we use in the environment, a cloud platform, an outsourced service, so that we're more routinely looking at that and understanding how the product changes throughout its life cycle. And I think that's a great call out about, the third parties have their own third parties, and it continues to extend. And that's definitely something that the industry has to expand its understanding of both what's inside of products, but then all the entities that are contributing to a product in some way. So I think a lot of great points.
Great points as well. Joshua, I'll bring it back to what you're seeing as the top 3 cybersecurity threats that you see organizations facing as well.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think I probably come from a different perspective since,
Right.
I'm largely on the product development and deployment and clinician front end side of things. So for me, I think one of the biggest issues I see is historically as a physician, and I think nurses and many frontline people feel this way, cybersecurity is a black box for me, right? What it does is I have a patient in front of me, there's information I need to know. I can't know it. It's very frustrating. I hate all this cybersecurity crap. When there's ransomware, when there is a privacy breach, when all of these things happen, that's somebody else's problem, right? I never deal with it. So it's a black box to me. I don't appreciate that patient harm. So for me, I think one of the things that keeps me up at night with the deployments we're doing, the products we're working on, is trying to change that mindset, especially as the products now have become so important to patient care, right? And I kind of think if previously I had sent a troponin on a patient, which is a blood test to see are they having a heart attack, and someone said, hey, you know what? Someone from Belarus broke into the lab and altered these measurements, and now you gave the patient the wrong treatment and they died. I'd say, who was responsible for the security, right? Like, this is unacceptable. We have to do something about it. Well, now that I'm relying on AI tests and tests that are, can be hacked, that actually is the same thing. I'd kind of like to see us stop talking about cybersecurity, at least from the clinician perspective, and talk about it as, data safety and reliability, because I'm relying on this data now to care for patients and it causes patient harm. So I think that's the first one, is a cultural one. And the second one is that tools are becoming more important for patient care, and relying on them is important. So I think as there are hacks and as there are data breaches, that they're actually, someone may be hacking to get personal health information to try and monetize it and whatever, but the negative consequences to actual patient care and real life harm, I think, keeps me up. The final one is more attention that we have a lot of, and I think probably everyone on this call feels it in the provider space, which is there's this tension to move fast and don't break things, right? And so, many of the vendors and the tech companies we work with have that move fast and break things mindset. And I live here in Silicon Valley, so I can understand that. in healthcare, when we break things, those are people, and people generally don't like it when you break their mother. So that's not so great. At the same time, we don't want to miss technologies that we could be implementing today that would save lives. So we don't want to miss technologies and miss, being quick enough to save lives. We also don't want to implement technologies that aren't ready yet.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think it comes down to the organizations that we are, and it's patient-centric organizations, whether you're a medical device manufacturer or you're dealing directly with inpatient or an ambulatory setting. It's down to the patient safety. And I think that's why healthcare is known to be a little bit slower to adopt and react, only because there's a lot more criticality at stake here. And Karthik, I know you bring a different perspective from a medical, I'll call it a medical device manufacturer. I'd like to get just your input from your own company. Obviously, your own company has cybersecurity concerns as well, and then in supplying into the industry as well. So Karthik, if you could share some insights, what you see as the critical concerns, I'd be interested to hear from you as well.
Absolutely, Mark. So clearly, as a company, we share exactly the same kinds of concerns. You have patient data on one side, you may have employee data. We have, manufacturing entities where you could, end up compromising the build of a product. You could have cyber issues. So the same ransomware, we have a lot of intellectual property. So cyber, from a company as a device manufacturer, has very similar concerns. The solutions we seek are no different than what the providers seek. From a medical device perspective, there are a few areas where certainly, we're super concerned. Number one is we don't want to be the company which took down a provider, right? We have Cleveland Clinic, Ascension, they're all customers of ours. The last thing we want is our product, for whatever reason, was the one which got hacked. And in turn, not only did we get hacked, we ended up, creating an incident for a hospital which either compromised patient safety, became a business liability. So there are a lot of things we're doing, we'll speak to, as to how we put cyber thinking in our design process. And I mean not test for cyber, but put this into our design process. So number one, don't want to be the company which took a hospital down. Number two is, I think someone brought this up, sort of balancing innovation and cyber. There's this desire to take all these new technologies, be it wearables, be it remote monitoring, be it AI, and apply these to very legitimate problems in healthcare, all of which seek a solution, all of which may have a commercial value, but they all pose a cyber risk as well. And the challenge for many is who's doing the return on investment between the risk of adopting this technology for what it could do to patient safety and patient harm versus the benefit it brings. So that trade-off is number two we got to work on, and then we continue to think through. Number three is the discipline of software engineering. So I've dealt with both, over my career, software and systems. The systems folks, are very, they think broad, they think safety, they think a lot of things which systems engineers are trained to think. The software engineers, depending on which discipline you hire them from, potentially are not thinking about these. To them, they want to bring the latest and greatest framework from GitHub or some other source, look at the most, convenient ways of deploying. There is a certain aspect to this makes my life easy to build a product. And in doing so, oftentimes if the governance is poor, end up putting in the product technology or software or a component which could compromise a significant portion of the system while providing limited value. So the other area we focus on is providing governance around, yes, it's convenient to not build something, but to procure it from the outside. But what kind of diligence has been done around the assumptions, the use cases that component was designed to work in? What kind of cyber requirements were they thinking when they built those components? So thinking through the software bill of material and trying to understand what each component poses a risk is another area of concern.
Karthik, Sai, what are you seeing from a vendor standpoint, running a cyber practice?
Yes, Mark. So I'll basically talk the top three, what my customers are facing in large, what are the common three threats they've been facing. The foremost is the ransomware has emerged as the grave menace to organizations across the, I would say all the sectors, not just the healthcare. So that's the topmost risk. Basically, even the ransomware, the major challenge what poses is earlier it used to be the case where hackers used to encrypt the things and ask for ransom, and they knew that there's no backup. But the organizations have evolved, the healthcare sector especially, they have now started taking things very seriously post COVID or during the COVID, that cyber resilience is key for the business operations. So though the hackers have become very smarter, they are taking help of sophisticated phishing attacks, luring the employees, are trying to exfiltrate the data and encrypt the data, not just encrypting and taking the data back to them. That's where that's would become a major challenge. So how do you address? Yes, you have a data backup and you have a business continuity in place, but you have an availability standpoint. What about the confidentiality? Already your data is with the hacker. So that's something which is very concerning to our customers, and how we protect is a big challenge, and that's one thing. Second is the APT attacks, what we are saying. The advanced persistent threats is one of the major challenges, I would say. The third one is IoT and medical devices, Mark. The rapid integration of IoT devices and the medical technologies has revolutionized the patient care, no doubt in it. But however, it has also introduced the a new cyber challenges. Many medical devices lack adequate security measures, making them the potential entry points for cyber attacks, as one of our panelists mentioned. So how do we protect this, IMT devices and these IoT devices is one of the major challenges. And finally, I echo what Skip and Keith mentioned. Is the third one is the TPRM. How we ensuring the third party risks. So that's the key aspect of it. Majority of these service providers, healthcare industry, they are relying on these service providers. We don't know how deep is the rabbit hole, as Skip mentioned. So we as an organization, we are trying to help in the first place. How do we making the CISOs or the CTOs or the CIOs focus on the core business policies, decision making? We're helping with automating the TPRM end to end, right from performing the vendor risk assessment. Are you identifying the right vendor in the first place? And then performing the tailor-made checklist and ensuring that what is the security hygiene practices, as Kip mentioned. Are they following? Are they having the same? Are they adhering to the similar policies and practices what we recommend or intend them to have, or they're having out better policies than us? And what is the security posture and how they are continuously maintaining the best practices? So on and so forth. So these are the 3 or 4 major challenges I see our customers are facing, Mark, and that's where we're helping them.
Thank you, Sai. And then you took it to the next sort of follow-on, which is a natural progression to which I'll ask the panel, and Keith, I'll go back to you here in relationship to that, because Sai kind of took it from the threats to sort of specific types of attacks. So I would ask the question, what are the specific types of cyber attacks that your organization has experienced, is experiencing? And I know there's a lot of buzz around AI, and I promise we're going to go there. and quantum computing and what's happening as we evolve, but I really want to follow that on in a question, but really want to get back to what are the kind of the specific types of cyber attacks that you're experiencing, and we'll pass that to the panel. But Keith, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, some very specific technical types of attacks that we're seeing. We continue to see email as being the primary vector by which threat actors are trying to enter our environment. That's quickly being followed by various web threats that are trying to exploit the ability for, trick the caregivers into going to something, providing critical information, or, attempting to capture some credentials, wear them down from a multi-factor authentication standpoint. So we're seeing a lot more targeted attacks that are entering our environment, where you can see that the threat actors are doing a lot more specific research and honing their craft before they launch it against us. Not so much the the spray and pray type of approach that we saw historically. I think that the second category is, we are seeing emerging threats around, specifically around AI, where people are trying to, utilize AI to either quickly create something that will circumvent our controls, or trying to extract information from various AI and large language platforms, or large learning model platforms to, derive information that they can use to impersonate our caregivers. So generally, the sophistication continues to increase, and we're also seeing that our patients, to some degree, are being targeted by various threats as the threat actors move on to easier targets for them to go after. So we're seeing the attack surface really expand and diversify in a lot of different ways. So I know that was kind of an open-ended answer, but we're generally seeing a lot of that expansiveness when it comes to the threats.
And I'll start. I'll go on because it's inevitable, and I think you brought it up, and it's large language models, more sophistication, being able now. We used to be able to identify with spoof, we'll call it emails that would come across. Some of them were more identifiable in the way their language is constructed, that were identifiers for most, not everybody, but for most people could tell this is not coming from who I think it is. Today, with large language models, ChatGPT, Bard AI, all those that are out there, obviously this is a big concern because they're evolving very quickly. They're being able to craft more compelling emails to your employees. So I'm going to go around everybody, but Keith, just to follow up, because it did come up in your conversation here, the challenges. AI is such a buzzword. You can't open anything today without hearing about it. But now in healthcare, a real challenge, because emails that maybe we used to be able to train employees to spot, they're evolving to become very sophisticated in the way they approach people and patients. So I'd like to open that up, and we'll go around the panel. But Keith, just to follow up on what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what your big concerns are there with LLMs.
I'll be quick in my response. I mean, the value of AI, ChatGPT, and all those technology cannot be underscored. I mean, the value that it brings from a clinical standpoint, patient care standpoint is beyond measure, and is a real revolutionary point in healthcare. So denying it, blocking it is not an option for most organizations, just because of that compelling innovation that it brings. So for us, we're really struggling and struggling, but making advances when it comes to educating our caregivers on what the threats are, but then really evaluating our cyber platforms. If if we're one click away from a caregiver from the enterprise being compromised, then we probably need to revisit our defense in depth strategy, and that's what we're doing to really make it so that cyber is there. And the caregivers are not the sole line of defense. There are multiple layers and multiple things that have to occur for that click to potentially happen. So we're really rethinking our strategy of what the security perimeter is, and then how we approach it, so that we're not standing in the way of innovation, and also making cybersecurity not overly burdensome on our caregivers.
Are you seeing more sophisticated LLMs being used to craft emails to employees that make it more difficult? Has their training been changed to help employees identify that they are becoming more hard to recognize, that they're not from a trusted entity?
So we can definitely tell in the last several years that the craftsmanship on phishing messages and spear phishing messages and other exploit attempts is increasing, and we believe that it is coming from the increased use of AI to further drive up the quality. So to your point, we are working from an education standpoint, but we're only going to be able to educate so much before email or messaging becomes an unusable platform. If you're receiving a message but spending 5 minutes trying to validate that it's an actual message. So that's why we're also trying to interlock as many technical controls and access limitations as possible, so that cybersecurity doesn't become the only focus of our caregivers. And should something happen, there are, multiple layers that prevent that not so good thing from happening, turning into a really bad thing.
And is there guidance provided on, obviously, if LLMs are deployed and trained internally? Because there has been an exploit that happened with ChatGPT and a major manufacturer company, which information was exploited from ChatGPT early on. What's the focus there on training and deploying LLMs within the organization, their use?
So we look at that as another cloud platform, in the sense that it falls under our data access and data use governance program. And so as part of that, there are policies, there are procedures for appropriate use, engagement, acquisition of the rights to use an AI platform. And we've really tried to streamline that. So it's no different, its use is no different than another SaaS or IaaS platform that a caregiver or an institute has to go through. So, we're trying to make something that is repeatable, so that we don't have a new one-off process that the caregiver, then has to go through. But there is a lot more control that we have to introduce as an industry as AI continues to disrupt, and it presents this amazing opportunity that our clinicians, want to and need to take advantage of.
Good. And Skip, I'll ask you the same question. It kind of started with what are the specific types of cyber attacks? And I'm sure they're probably very similar. If you can give your perspective there, and then we can also talk about the risk of AI, since it has come up too. And then we'll expand that to the panel, obviously.
Sure. I would concur with Keith. Email, number one, attack surface continues to be trying to slip enough quantity in. I think of the movie The Matrix and the attack in the last series, where they're just pounding on the peripheral exterior. That's kind of what it feels like when you look at our metrics. The interesting ones to me that were a bit more technical and thoughtful in their approach are some very targeted smishing through text messages of leaders requesting urgent funds transfers, things like that. We've seen changes to PO processing and purchase receipt systems where they've tried to go in and imposter or impersonate another company but change the routing information. And I would say that we have already experienced an AI impersonation during an interview. So to me, that represents infiltration potentially. And we did catch it using AI technology to recognize it. So the one on the horizon for me that gives me great pause is a deep fake. If you want to go to the AI route, trying to stay really close to that and understand how we leverage AI in the form of defense against AI, because I don't know that we can do it without it.
And how do you train and deploy LLMs in your environment? And I guess there's two folds to that question I was trying to get at. One was the deployment, also with organizations in healthcare, outside of healthcare. Employees are utilizing AI, those large language models, for a lot of different reasons. And they're putting in a lot of potentially sensitive information as well. So I understand how Keith's approaching it from a cloud standpoint, but also from education of employees or guidance to employees about the utilization, what kind of information that could be exploited that's being put in there. So it's kind of twofold there, how they're being deployed within the system to ensure their security, and also the usage within the organization itself and the information that might be exploited by using those large language models.
I think the very first thing that we recognized was it was grave concern. So how do we set the foundation? And again, I go back to our policies and standards, which sets that foundation of expectation for acceptable use. We're also, looking at the technical controls to prevent access to particular AI platforms that we would prefer to have available to our employees on the inside of our perimeter, but not allow access to things outside that we can't control. So we're looking at methods around that. I would say from an education standpoint, almost as soon as we put out the new policy and standard, we started doing mass communications with email to notify, alert, and try to tell a story in a way that my mother would understand what we're trying to convey in terms of its risk. So keeping it simple, easy to understand, and thus far that's what we're leveraging. I'm sure there's more to come, but we had to start somewhere.
I understand. I appreciate that. Joshua, you're involved with obviously clinical staffing, also on the health tech startup side of it. If you want to take on the AI question as well, and your opinion and your response.
Yeah, I think so the large language models in healthcare is probably a whole nother couple-hour webinar, which would also be interesting. I think in terms of the security risk, one of the things that I really enjoy about working in healthcare is that I think you find a lot of people who are kind of get it done. Whatever's best for the patient in front of me is what I need to do, and I really respect and enjoy that. I think the downside to that is if someone thinks, oh, maybe if I put this information in ChatGPT, they'll help me solve this thing I can't figure out, and that I know I'm not supposed to, but this person's dying, I got to do something. And so I think, it's easy for people to give themselves permission because, they're prioritizing something that feels right, but it's still wrong. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is to provide guidelines, assuming that people are going to use the technologies we don't want them to use anyway, guidelines how to use them safely without divulging PHI or sensitive information, and ways that they can use the technologies without compromising safety and security and privacy. How well that's working, it's really hard to know because we're such a federated large organization. I'm sure others can relate to that what goes on where we can't see it, we're not sure, but that's kind of been the angle we've been trying to take with it.
And Karthik, from your side of it, what is your viewpoint on the challenges of the large language models and the risk inherent thereof?
So there are two at least which we look at constantly. One is a general problem which affects machine learning AI in general, which is the transparency of what exactly is generating the results that you're consuming. So I think we just heard, that from Joshua that, someone's trying to save a life. So when you have a model which has been taught, but there is no deterministic algorithm driving what it's being taught, which means nobody can really, put on a piece of paper and say, if then else, whatever it be, the usual logical rules we apply, then what you got is a black box, not just for the consumer of the platform, but potentially for the developer of the platform as well. So that implies that unless there are smarts inside the platform to detect it's been altered, you could alter it and then nobody knows, including the developer. So generally speaking, when we sell medical devices, for example, there are ways to secure the code running inside it, both from technology like secure boot and digital signatures. But more importantly, when we are allowing, this code isn't allowed to change and evolve on its own. It's not supposed to be learning. It's supposed to be locked in. So when you have these models, be it large language or not, which are constantly learning, you got to wonder at what point does the validation end and actual use digress from what it's been trained to do. What if somebody changed the source of data? If these things are going to be trained, constantly, they're learning from what they're seeing. What if that data changes? So some of the problems that we look at in these is in terms of when you have a black box, how do you identify that the black box is secure? And what exactly when a black box has both logic and data driving it, how do you detect that these pieces of data are changing without completely locking it down? So I think that is one of the bigger issues that we've seen. The other issues, of course, are if you apply these large language models, again, it goes back to the transparency issue, but somewhat of a cyber and a non-cyber link is there's bias in these models as well. So if you don't understand the bias, you may not realize if the bias is coming inherently from the way the model was developed, and you shouldn't be generalizing the model? Or is it because there's a cyber issue with the model or the data which is causing that bias? So these are two areas I think we look at to understand how, generally speaking, AI and machine learning, but more specifically, a smarter machine learning, which is ChatGPT or large language models, will impact cybersecurity.
Those are some great points, and obviously we can't overlook the bias in the models because it does exist. They're large language models. They're training. I hate to use the term guessing what the follow-on word should be, but I mean that's really basically what they're doing is they digest more and more, and they're getting better and better. But we're in early days still today. Sai, what's your perspective on protecting LLMs from being used for malicious purposes? And how do you ensure that large language models are not used to generate sensitive data? What's your perspective from a vendor standpoint?
Yes. So I would talk in two perspectives. One is, so we have to have a clear segregation or a policy in place for our employees, that what sort of a data you want to ingress to the LLM models like ChatGPT to get an output. So there could be a human error where you end up providing the sensitive data, and these LLM models don't guarantee you the security of that information that's passing out. It's getting stored in the background and memory somewhere in form of a data, and that is getting retrieved out of his reinforced learning, and that is fed as an output for some other query by some other gentleman elsewhere. So the sensitivity of data is a concern. To address that, yes, we can it's a benefit of the audience also. They can procure some secure APIs from the LLM models which they're providing, where the data is only the data input is taken, it is encrypted, taken by the LLM models, and they process it, but they're not going to store your queries or your test cases or whatever information you feed it with it. That's one thing. And second is major concern is the bias, as Karthik rightly mentioned. I don't want to name one of the largest LLM models. Has found that it was giving a biased outcomes. So when it comes to healthcare, if you fed that information, and that could have a negative repercussions if it is related to any healthcare information or related to a patient in the R&D, especially in the R&D. So I think these are the major challenges. I think we should cautiously use LLMs rather than I'd say is that we built in-house models, taking help of vendor like us, where you build your in-house models, you train with your data sets all together, and expect the desired outcome for your problem statement. That should be the way forward. Building your own models in line to your business requirements or your organizational needs. And there also, as Skip mentioned, now how you're protecting that data sets which you're going to train, how you're protecting the data which is passing on to your deep neural networks. That's again altogether a different gambit. How you're protecting, how you're sanitizing, and who has the right access, and what are the different controls to it. So this is what I look at when it comes to LLMs. Mark, these are my two thoughts.
Thank you for that, Sai. I think it's critical. It's obviously it's sort of a new frontier for a lot of people, although they've been around for a while. But I think the utilization has increased. We hear about it every single day. Some of the job here is chasing a ghost in a lot of ways because of things that are happening here with the speed of faster computers, which we can talk about. Quantum computing, they're going to make it very difficult to keep pace, although it's difficult today with the organizations that we have. Keith, I go back, and I think an important question here, I know we've got one question, and if questions come up, we will attempt to answer those at the end, but it's part of my questioning too, and I see it came up, was what are the challenges, and you mentioned 250,000 devices, which is staggering to secure, and a huge challenge, I'm sure. What are the challenges securing IoT devices at Cleveland Clinic?
I think that's another 1 or 2 hour webinar, to be perfectly honest. But I think we've observed a lot of challenges when we've talked with our peers. Visibility is certainly first and foremost. It's hard to protect what you don't know exists. And part of that visibility issue is back to the earlier points about supply chain and integrating IT and cyber into the purchasing, so you know what's entering your facility. I think that another challenge is obviously understanding the regulations and the restrictions, what you can and cannot do to IoT and MIoT devices that potentially compromises their integrity or stops them from working, which is the whole reason for them being there. And then I think as these IoT devices produce more valuable data, how you manage that interconnection between IoT devices is probably the third challenge that I think we have, because as you connect more things, then that attack surface becomes larger. But then pivoting, looking forward, we see a lot of innovation that also comes with risk, but we have to manage that so that that can move forward. We see consumer IoT devices at some point being on the horizon, that we're going to connect our systems to what a patient has, a bring your own medical device kind of concept, deploying technology into people's homes. So again, that kind of boundary of what are our devices that we need to protect is becoming a little bit harder to define as technology becomes more pervasive in wearables and what they carry with them. So just some points I would add.
I know you brought up a great point there, and the challenges with legacy devices that may no longer be receiving updates, and over the years that are within your organization. How do you identify those, inventory those, to know what do we have and what is legacy that's no longer being updated, patched? How do you get your arms around that? I know you talked about contracting moving forward, but I don't know when that started. Obviously, there's a lot of legacy devices to be identified, and there's so many devices to know where everything is and what it's capable and what the risk is, and is it patchable, and it doesn't need to be moved out of the system and replaced. How do you get your hands around all that, I guess, is a question I would have.
So I think it's important to understand that question is not just important from a cyber standpoint, but also from a patient safety standpoint, first and foremost. So we've developed a lot of partnership with the equivalent of clinical engineering or biomed, as this is something that they know the most about, because they've been supporting these assets for the duration of their existence in our environment in the vast majority of instances. So we've worked closely with them to develop visibility platforms that will detect assets that are out there in the environment and enhance our inventory so that we can solution jointly on comprehensive ways to address IoT security. So deploying anything we can that's on box, network isolation, managing the life cycle of the devices, working on business cases and budgetary requests for replacement of legacy assets, and then really taking a patient safety and risk management focus to try and prioritize it, because there's never a shortage of things that need attention. So we have to find some way to prioritize all of that space into something that's much more manageable. But that partnership, I think, is foundational, and without that foundation, it's not going to be successful, because this isn't just a cyber problem. This is a shared organizational patient safety, patient risk challenge.
And I think you bring up some great points, because I typically we become a little bit myopic in thinking that medical devices are infusion pumps and other devices we know that are in hospital systems. And then you did bring up the environment is expanding, right? We're moving from hospital to home and in between. And we've got patients with devices that will be communicating potentially. So that environment is expanding beyond what I think some of us may typically think of as traditional medical devices within a hospital system. That's become an expanding ecosystem to have to manage as well. Skip, I'd ask you the same question there is how do you secure these devices, and how do you manage the security of these devices over time?
Much like Keith, it starts with visibility. So we rely heavily on technology that performs deep packet inspection and identification through multiple integrations with all of our other technology. That correlation of that data gives us a clear picture of what's riding on the wire. It's not perfect, but it's so much better than what I've got in the form of a CMDB database because, in large part, medical devices were not inventoried. Our managed assets were, but what about everything else? Well, everything else constitutes 75% of the environment, and the managed part of the environment is probably 25, maybe 30%. So it's a large footprint. Like Keith, on any given day, I have right around 1 million active IPs between guest and corporate networks that I'm trying to get a handle on. So first and foremost, it starts with an inventory, CIS control number 1 and 2, and then 3. And I don't even go past that because I can't get past 1 and 2 often in terms of identifying what should be in an inventory. And then you look at it from the patient safety aspect. We absolutely leverage clinical engineering. There are our hands and feet in the environment. They know when systems can be patched because they can't be on a patient. It's a very different model than using a patch push through technology like SCCM with traditional IT. So it's got to be very calculated, very, very scheduled, project-like, and requires a lot of data analysis. So I rely heavily on data, on OLAs, KPIs. I'm looking for the measurement of success, things like aging of tickets. If my aging of tickets progresses beyond a certain amount, that tells me that we're losing traction on our patching, because the vulnerabilities are never going to go away. So if you look at it and say, well, when the vulnerabilities go down, we've had success, you're going to miss the boat completely because that number is always going in this direction. So just a few thoughts.
Which brings me, Karthik, to you as well. So how should vendors of medical devices and health IT solutions address cyber risk during the development cycle?
So fair enough. And I'd in fact extend this. I do a ton of work on this, both on standards bodies as well as internally. One of the challenges, so we have, if you look at the product development lifecycle, and FDA has now started using these terms as well. You got a concept stage, which goes through a design stage, to a qualification phase, to an installation, maintenance, decommissioning. Generally speaking, the less mature companies would look at cyber usually at the qualification phase, which is also called V&V, or verification validation. So my hypothesis is, starting from concept, we had briefly touched on it, one needs to decide as a company if it's appropriate for the device they're manufacturing to be connected to the IT network. There's benefits to doing so, there are risks of doing so, and there's got to be a trade-off to make certain the right risks are being accepted for the right value. And I'll extend this to a different discussion where there needs to be a partnership among the provider and the vendor, but for now, first the vendor needs to do so. Second, as they walk into design, there have to be security requirements. Just like you have safety requirements, you have performance requirements. There have got to be security requirements, and the use cases drive. Do you need authentication? Do you need some sort of authorization? Do you need encryption? Do you need confidentiality, integrity? So depending on what the product does, the kinds of data it deals with, these non-functional requirements need to be specified with acceptance criteria. The next phase, which hardly is a bit new to the business as well, is a security risk analysis. Just like you would look at the model or an architecture block of your product, look at all the entry points where you might compromise safety. You've got to look at security as well. So this allows you to also generate the right kinds of documentation when you've wrapped up your risk controls and you know that you can mitigate every one of the risks identified. So yet again, your provider knows which of those risk controls are now passed over to the provider so they can partner and participate in implementing those. Security design reviews, again, needs to happen early and often. So that's design phase. When you get to the qualification phase, you do the traditional V&V, which go against your security criteria. You got to look at your source code and bytecode and run the tools which are available now, looking for especially SOUP, which is the software of unknown provenance. Some developer pulled something from somewhere you don't even know exists. So you got to inventory all of that, figure out what their cyber posture is, and make certain that your static and dynamic tools are running against all the software, not just the ones you developed. Next, you walk into installation. You got to build a ton of security disclosures. We create a lot of other disclosures, but the providers need block diagrams. They need intended use statements. Should these be connected, not connected? They need to know what these residual risks are. So now they can work within their organization to either accept these as is or find a way to mitigate these. Then comes the change management, the maintenance. What's the patching process? How do you assure that the software being supplied is the right one? Because you no longer have control on it. What are you doing with incident response? So if a provider detects an anomaly, who's responsible in a company? Who's identified to be that point of contact? And what are these SLAs to remediation? How do you handle sensitive data? If we get a device back into our company because it's not working, we got to make certain there is a way to de-identify the data or completely remove it before our service people get to see it. And last but not the least, the most forgotten piece of cyber is when you decommission a device as well. We do it at home. If we were to throw off a computer, we wouldn't just leave it with all the data on it. So there's got to be guidelines around how do we purge sensitive data and maybe even configuration data. If someone could hack in and figure out what the configuration of these devices is, they could stand up their own device with that configuration. So to me, the whole idea of cyber resilience should be built in all the way from concept to decommissioning. And this way, as a company, you're able to not only produce a better product, but you're also able to communicate the weaknesses better to your customers so they can choose to accept the risk or put additional risk controls or compensating controls around these weaknesses that you have shared with them.
I think that's very critical, Karthik, because you brought up from conception all the way to decommissioning. And I don't think, some people really think of that from a medical device standpoint, that the thought process now begins from ideation and conception. And then there is the concern with once a medical device is decommissioned and any information that would be on that device. So those are some key areas that I'm not sure everybody is aware, depending on where they're at in this life cycle, what they're focusing on. But certainly it's good to know the medical device manufacturers are now integrating that in design all the way to decommissioning and thinking about the entire life cycle. As I know everybody on the panel who has those devices within their systems has to think about from not necessarily the ideation piece of it, although they may have some input there, but also inputting that device into their system and then decommissioning those devices as well. So, another thing, because I'm conscientious of time here, we've got a lot of topics and there's a lot of things we've talked about that could go on a specific topic panel by themselves. But one thing that I think that everyone here can speak to, and Joshua, I'll go to you, is how is your organization improving its security awareness and training programs? So cybersecurity is holistic. Everybody within an organization plays a role. Everybody's susceptible. A lot of the attacks, the exploits are actually coming internally by accident, some by design. But what are you seeing there? What are you putting in place to bring awareness and training, which is evolving, obviously?
Yeah, and let me answer that question, but actually I just wanted to build on what Karthik said a second ago.
That's great.
Which is one of the things that we've seen is, we do a few million telehealth visits a year, and we talk about remote patient monitoring. And I think one of the big issues for, if we expand cybersecurity to think of it as data safety and quality and reliability, is that remote patient monitoring of whom and of what. And I think back to when I first started in medicine, actually at the Cleveland Clinic, and I would have these pediatric diabetic patients who would come in with DKA, which is, their blood sugars are terrible. And you look at the glucometer and all their blood sugar readings were great. And it turns out kids learn pretty quickly what the blood sugar reading is of most common fruit, right? And so they would just be taking the fruit as their glucometer readings. So now that we're doing all of this telehealth and we have a device, whose weight did the device actually measure? Whose blood pressure did it actually measure? Whose EKG strip did it actually get? And going back to that really needs to be integrated into the design phase of how we're going to ensure that the identity of who we're monitoring. So I just want to put a plug in for that because it's been causing us havoc.
That's a great point, because as we move to remote patient monitoring, as you mentioned, that we're doing, and the identity of those that are taking those measurements, are we taking the measurement of those that are intended to take it, or Yeah, that's a critical piece. Yeah.
So in terms of what we're doing in training, you know, we have a lot of our attacks are through phishing, and so we have simulated phishing campaigns that are, you know, I get a simulated fish attack every day. I probably get real fish attacks every day too, for that matter. And so that's been helping us. You know, it feels like the biggest problems we have as such a large distributed workforce is the people, and so that gets into the training, and it's because they're either inappropriate or ignorant, obviously, and I think the malicious is virtually non-existent internally. Inappropriate because they're excited to share something, which they shouldn't, or ignorant because they're excited to use something, which they shouldn't. And so that goes back to the large language model discussion and training largely.
How often do you provide the security awareness training, and how do you measure the effectiveness of the training?
Yeah, so we have periodic training, which is like the big module that you sit down through. We have recurrent emails out and communications, and then we have pretty much constant monitoring in terms of like the simulated phishing attacks, and that you get feedback on that on did you identify and respond appropriately to a simulated phish attack, and then we monitor what percentage are appropriately doing that.
And Keith, same question at Cleveland Clinic. What type of programs? How do you measure the effectiveness? How often are you running those programs to educate all your clinical staff? Which, you know, everybody's a little different. So I don't know if it's designed differently. What your approach is there for security awareness training, and how you measure success.
Yeah, so I think we're we're approaching it in relatively similar ways. You know, we have a traditional annual cyber training program that is generalized, but is also focused in nature. You know, based on a caregiver's role within the organization. We're also moving forward with on-demand and on-need training. So when a caregiver is not able to successfully pass our phishing test, then a small module will appear, and they will, you know, have an opportunity to go through micro training at that point. We've also worked to establish an extended network of cyber aware individuals, you know, business relationship managers. You know, we're starting to stand up a role of a BISO, a cybersecurity advocate, but then we're also working to embed cyber champions, or find clinicians of various types and disciplines that are cyber aware and can help us to spread the message throughout the organization. And then because we have a large development, you know, portfolio, we've worked very closely to extend the knowledge of secure code development, code design to the several hundred individuals who participate across the organization in that build process. From a visibility standpoint, we have, you know, standard metrics like most organizations have, but we're also trying to distill that so that leaders can see at the individual caregiver level, the institute, and eventually at the enterprise level, you know, almost a scorecard, if you will, for each caregiver, how they are, you know, how they are scoring. You know, are they completing their annual training? How are they doing with their phishing? Any, you know, other observations, so that we can get that information into the hands of the entire business, so that we can leverage all the other leaders that exist in the organization, you know, to really help us drive improvement. So, you know, I would say those are kind of the things that I, you know, would highlight. We're also working to bring in others from IT and outside of IT to really sit with our engineers, our architects, where there's interest, and learn our craft, so that you know, they can take that back, and then we're working to embed ourselves in their organization so we can learn their craft as well. You know, it's not successful if you're trying to impose something on a process you don't understand, and then you get in the way. So those are some of the tactics we're trying.
Interesting. And Skip, I'm sure it's similar in approach. Anything that you can add from Ascension's perspective?
I mean, Keith said it all. I'd say ditto, ditto, ditto on all fronts. We are one area that we're investigating that we've had great success on our own cyber team is the aspect of gamification. And so we're postulating and thinking about how could we enter gamification into the larger staff and use it in a meaningful way that had more people embrace it as opposed to, oh, the doldrums, got to do another training again. So that's one area that we're investigating that's hopefully promising for us.
Yeah, gamification is interesting to get better engagement and to be able to resonate with all employees across. You've got the business groups, you've got the clinical groups. Cy, you're involved. Oh, go ahead.
Just to keep it, I did want to interrupt. I apologize. That is what we're exploring with that dashboard and the grade card, is the underlying concepts of gamification in our organization and how we can have the leaders drive that as we realize that the leaders are naturally competitive, especially when we're talking about, quality and the performance of their team. So we're trying to take advantage of that ourselves.
Thanks for that, Keith. Cy, working with healthcare providers and even internally with your own company, what's your perspective and how do you measure the success of the training programs, and what are you envisioning for future awareness for employees?
Sure, Mark. So primarily, see, when it comes to our customers, we help them with maintaining their compliance. We take up as a managed services, be it maintaining their ISO 27 HIPAA. So as part of these compliance, we help them there. We come up with a comprehensive the learning program, training curriculum, throughout the year. So for example, every quarter we perform workshop driven trainings. It's more of a simulation driven, covering entire cyber policies of a particular customer. So what are the critical cyber policies, like every employee has to be aware, and how they have to act upon it, and what is their roles and responsibilities. So that's something which we cover on quarterly basis, as one of our friends said, that on demand. So as and when the contractors or the the employees join, so every bi-weekly or once in a week, we provide this awareness trainings. We don't believe in a classroom driven. It's more of a simulation where interactive sessions is what we believe in. A very infographic or a video driven trainings will do. Not only training the employees, but we also help the security teams of a customer get trained. We do lots of red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming exercises along with the teams. We create an environment that what if a real scenario, if a ransomware attack is happening, what is your checklist, what is supposed to do. Let's take, if it's a BCP, what is your what is your drill. So for different scenarios of business continuity, how do you do it? So so on and so forth. So from a technical standpoint, what should be, will also give a scenario and ask them, this is the scenario, now you do capture the flag where the issue is there. So these things we perform, Mark, in both the way. One is training the security teams and giving this awareness sessions. As you mentioned, how do you evaluate is, we come up with quiz. We'll evaluate in different methods. So once in quarter, not only the trainings, we'll also send the take some exams to them, and we send a link, and that's a mandatory. We ensure that the customer make them as a part of their KRA. For every employee, it's they have to mandatory take these exams and pass the exams. So whoever fail that particular quiz on different policies of the organizations, we take a small separate training to them and make them to take a retest. That's how we bring up the security culture within every employee. And not only that, coming to our organization, and we also recommend our customers, is most important is the incentives and the recognitions we have to give to our employees. So the employees are the, there's a saying, employees are the weakest link, and I would say they are also the first line of defense for getting of all this ransomware attacks, so on and so forth, or the phishing emails or fake phishings. So we have to incentivize them, and we have to train them also to identify what are the different insider threats, so on and so forth. So there'll be some motivation for them. when you give some appreciation letters and so on and so forth. So these are the different strategies we apply from a training perspective and the measurement of the the outcomes of our training.
And Karthik, I know you're involved in the engineering side of the equation here too, but obviously Rollin has their own cybersecurity awareness and training and measurement for employees, and you're obviously part of that. Can you give any perspective from the medical device side? I'm sure all organizations are very similar to a certain degree in employee awareness and training. Do you have any perspective, Karthik, that you could add from your side?
Sounds good. So the angle I'll add this is clearly corporate the way you asked me, but I'm on a standards body committee for what I think is the primary standard for cyber for medical devices in the US, which is a ANSI UL standard called 2900-2-1. So 2900 is for any connected device and -2-1 is for healthcare specifically. So the standard and how we apply to your question and what we do inside the company are very similar. There is a training aspect. There is the software development aspect of it. There's a supply chain similar to providers sourcing from companies like us. We source components from third parties too. So there are some process and procedures we've got to apply. So what we're trying to do is to apply some of these principles, not just from the product development lifecycle the way I shared. There is a employee aspect to it. There are, generally speaking, from a internal vulnerability perspective, you either have vulnerable employees who are subject to phishing and other scams, or you have vulnerable systems where, for whatever reason, good reason, these systems are identified and known to the outside, not patched on the inside, generally designed. Nobody knows what these things are. Even this is true even within a non-provider space, that you might have printers, you may have old fax machines, you may have other pieces of equipment, which over time, somebody just plugged in a dongle and connected them to the corporate network because it's easy to manage them. Or there is something you could go to your computer and fax. So you have all these things which exist. So the general ideas of visibility, the ideas around training humans as well as making certain systems which are visible and clearly at risk are dealt with, and then applying the principles around product development, which we had spoken to earlier, and then applying supplier level controls as well, are what we look at as a holistic process towards addressing cybersecurity.
An interesting perspective, Karthik. I appreciate that. In the time remaining, this is an interesting question Lindsay's posed here in the panel question. I'll address it, Keith. I'll start with you again. It's to think about here is how healthcare organizations can make the most of the metaverse without comprising on compliance and security. I know people are evaluating it. We've created our own virtual reality or metaverse within InfoVision as well. So Keith, I don't know what your perspective on that as we look at your environment moving into the virtual environment and how you can make the most of the metaverse without compromising on compliance and security, if you have a perspective.
That is an interesting question. We also have a lot of research and a lot of different use cases regarding virtual reality of different types in our environment. We're trying to take a similar type of approach to AI. Looking at what are the minimum security guidelines and guardrails that we have to put in place, to protect our environments and meet regulatory requirements, but allow the innovation to continue and the clinicians to continue building, solutions on top of those. So, I think just like AI and, other innovation, we've had to really kind of double down on the risk approach and analyzing it, and not tackle it from a let's take our traditional controls and wrap it around that. What really are those risks, and what do we have to solve to allow this solution to continue being usable? Because you can lock down a system all you want, and it's great from a cyber standpoint, but it's completely useless to the person who actually wants it. So striking that balance requires that deep analysis from an architectural standpoint to figure out the most appropriate controls. But that's kind of a tough one, because VR is very is very much changing, and it's also kind of going through its different hype cycles. So we see the adoption coming in waves, whereas right now we see a very large wave of AI coming towards us, and we're going through it right now. So that's a great question. It gives me a lot to think about, to be honest.
Joshua, as you're involved in innovation and with health tech startups and on the clinical side as well, which will eventually, I foresee, I think everybody does, that in the next few years, we talk a lot about the metaverse. People are looking for the use cases and where does it make sense and to engage and meet patients. I believe it'll be coming. What's your perspective on that question? I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, so far the most promising VR sort of applications I've seen have either been in physical therapy and gamification of physical therapy, or in mental health and meditation, and we've invested in some of those companies, and they're doing pretty well. I do think that there's a pretty interesting future which will really destroy any like minimal amount of sleep that people on this panel are getting now, where there's an opportunity for a virtual twin, right? Which is, if you think about what the medical record is right now, it's a combination of paper, either digitized paper but still paper, and some actual data modeling, which is kind of a data representation of a patient and their healthcare journey. And when I'm interacting with a real patient and with a data or information representation of that patient. And you can imagine that information representation of the patient could eventually get to be a much higher fidelity if it were a true kind of virtual reality representation of that patient, and could then have a better kind of mental model of that patient that gets passed through the healthcare system, so that it's a more seamless transition through the different phases. At which point, the amount of information and detail about that patient is now widely available within that VR space, so that no one here ever gets sleep again. So I think I could envision that as a future.
Interesting points, as digital twins will become a reality as we move forward too. That opens up a whole new black box, if you will, to keep everybody up at night. I mean, there's enough right now. We didn't even get to touch today because we're going to be ending into quantum computing and the speed of computers getting to the point where it's going to be very difficult to try to stay ahead as we try to do today. So I know no one's probably getting sleep, and now we've made sure that no one will probably get any sleep with that kind of discussion. That's the environment we live in. I think everybody understands the risks, and we're all just trying to mitigate, because I think that's what you can do, is mitigate, right? With that, I appreciate the panel and the insights that everybody has brought today. I think we have some different perspectives from provider side, from the medical device side, the clinical side, the innovation side, the vendor side. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank AI CourseSpot for putting this together and sponsoring this event, and each and every panel member, Keith, Joshua, Skip, Karthik, Sai. Thank you for your time today and your insights. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, and everyone, for your lovely discussion. So just to wrap up, we extend our gratitude to all our community partners, the esteemed speakers, and the attendees who took time and participated in this forum, which I'm sure provided a platform for knowledge enrichment. As our panel speakers were exceptional, we appreciate their willingness to come together and share their valuable insights. Further, if any one of you feel you missed something or wish to look back at the session, let me reiterate that today's event was broadcasted on the YouTube page of our company, so you all can go and see the recording anytime. And if you are looking out for recent technological updates and advancements, log on to our website and social media channels. We'll be sharing lots of knowledge-sharing topics, details, announcement of next events, and much more, which will help you register and attend the same. Before we close for this afternoon, we would like to thank InfoVision, who is our knowledge and innovation partner, and Digit7, which is our technology partner. To understand more in depth and connect with them, all of you can go through their website, which is infovision.com, and stay abreast with the technological advancements. Further, there are lots more in store for this year, with a focus on different industries like banking, financial, insurance, telecom, high-tech, media, entertainment, retail, healthcare, supply chain, manufacturing, and so on. So request all of you to keep connected with us and enjoy the learning. It was a pleasure bringing this session to you, and we hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. We look forward to having more sessions with you. Take care and have a lovely week ahead, guys. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.